Okay, I am live, and it's quite not 7 o'clock. I am early, whoever said I was late to stuff. We are here for the Live at 7 Unscripted chat. And as we have people log in, I like to always remind people anything you say here can and will be used against you in the court of public opinion. So I cannot ensure any confidentiality. I do try not to tell people who is talking when in the chats because it doesn't seem like people can see the chats later on. So if you post a question here, I'll try not to give details on people's lives, but I can't ensure confidentiality. Obviously, other people can see what you post in the chat, but this is primarily for the chatted people. And if you're tuning in after 7 o'clock and we're not live streaming, that's totally great. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and share and all that goodness. But also, tune in next week at 7 o'clock. So I've tried to be consistent on this thing because the idea is hopefully we build some people up that see the different R&R mental health videos and different things. They have mental health questions. Maybe they're people in therapy. Maybe they're people that are just people, and so they have mental health issues. Or maybe they're people who are not able to go to therapy and they need some kind of help or support. So at least we can give some answers and talk about some mental health related stuff, because I think everybody needs somebody. Sometimes in our life, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. And it goes to the Lean On Me. That's the Lean On Me song. If you're not educated in the beauty of old music, old being a relative term. Okay, yes, Lean On Me. How important do you think premarital, first question, yay. How important do you think premarital counseling is? What topics would you focus on or are the most important? And I feel like premarital counseling is something that used to be a lot more common and seems to be less and less done. I will ask the question, I will return your question with a question. Would you rather have premarital counseling or postmarital counseling? So what the number one mistake that couples make, I think, when it comes to conflict is waiting too long to get help. And it's not easy to get help because if you involve your friends, that usually leads to triangulation, where it actually increases drama in the long term. You go to your family, and the problem is, of course, maybe it's your family, so it's in-laws for the other person. My dad used to say this, like, family forgives but in-laws do not. So you always have to be careful when dealing with the in-laws. Glad you're doing good. By the way, if you want to watch a YouTuber and YouTube channel, how do you say the name? The three, because it's like, is that a three? But it's anyway, the ridiculous on three. Shoot your mental health question, bro. But anyway, I focus on every topic when it comes to couples. The ridiculous one. Okay. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, one. Sorry, on YouTube. That's clever. Anyway, I focus on communication, conflict resolution, sexual intimacy. I focus on every topic I can think of for premarital counseling. And it's really about what works best for that couple. So it's very personalized. What we focus on tends to be what that couple is both. I mean, like, we go over a general list of things, but mostly it's like what is working and what is not working in that relationship. With couples counseling, I think it's always important to balance the things that are not working with the things that are working, because if you focus too much on the problems, you tend to get more problems. You can't spotlight problems and expect them to go away. So if in therapy, all you talk about is what isn't working in a relationship, that is going to make things worse. So the ridiculous one, you said you have a question. I didn't see the question. But pop up any mental health related questions whatsoever are cool. So yeah, get to therapy early in a relationship, and you can find like a good therapist might actually even help you figure out potential problems down the long run that you didn't think about, incompatibility issues. So I've done a lot of celebrating of marriages, and I've only twice told couples that they should not get married, but I did 2 different times, which is not a fun conversation to have in premarital counseling. And it's not actually necessarily implied that you should, like, that you're going to ask permission of whether the person thinks you should get married. So having the conversation where it's like, guys, I have to say, I don't think you guys should get married is a tough one to have. I did it twice, and both of them ended up getting divorced. I'm not saying none of the couples that I didn't do it with didn't get divorced, like it didn't 100%, but every time I knew it wasn't going to work, it didn't work. So unrelated to mental health, how do you become so handsome? Were you born that way, or did you have to earn it? This is hard work, bro. I'm barely holding it together. No, thanks, bro. You're a good looking man yourself, so I appreciate the compliment. I think guys should compliment each other far more often. It's like one of those things that you see women do it all the time where they're like, girl, your hair looks good. I love those heels. And then like guys are like, what's up, man? No, not much. And it's like how strangers talk. Or maybe we don't even say that. We just go, and then they go back and they go, and then walk on. We should normalize compliment each other. Yes, girl. All right, moving on to question will be regarded. Moving on, my questions will be regarded to the topic at hand. Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, so I will take the break of positive affirmations because I think that that's something we should do more often in just being affirming and encouraging of each other and supporting each other, celebrating ourselves, celebrating others. You know, it's debated how many compliments to negate an insult. They used to say it's 2 for 1. So if 2 compliments for 1 insult, but there's some researchers that actually suggest it's 6. So you have to do 6 compliments for every 1 insult, or a person is going to walk away with mostly a negative impression. So if you give one insult and 2 compliments, most people are going to be like, oh yeah, they hated it. They hate me. They hate everything. Everything sucks. Right? Because that's just how we are. We've designed to filter that way. And I wouldn't even say that's a negative filter. I'd say that's the default filter. A negative filter is when you filter out the compliment entirely and you only hear the insults. Flowery language. Yep. And sandwiches. So compliment, sandwiches. Compliment, insult, compliment. With a little sugar, the medicine goes down. Okay, so hello everyone joining the chat. Like I said in the beginning, I don't always share who people are, so people don't necessarily know it afterwards, but it's good to see you guys all here. I love you all. All right, talk about why transformation process can feel like you're going through a death of your old self and then uncertainty of who we are. So that is such a good topic and worth discussing over and over, because I think a lot of people are not prepared for the cognitive resistance that is really going to happen anytime you try to change. So if we think of our brain as hardwired, right, to certain ways, there's programmed, right? There's neurons that fire only one way that are literally going to have to die, and new neurons are going to have to form. And one of the things that causes for your brain, just on a rudimentary level, is energy. So trying to change your life, it takes a lot of energy, as well as there's a whole bunch of different things about the old version of yourself that is dying. And any process of learning anything is part of that, right? The version of you that didn't know that thing is dying, and there's a new version being born. But especially things that have to do with deep emotional ties or identity. Identity is the core and the hardest thing to change, the way we see ourselves. And so when you're going through a process of transformation, you have no idea what that new you is going to look like. And so that can be a really scary thing. And even though you might know it's going to be a better version of you, I always think about personally the song by Collective Soul, The World I Know, as I stepped to the edge to see my world below, and I laughed to myself. That was like when everybody sang like Pearl Jam and Creed and band that everyone loves to hate, but they're actually okay. Nickelback. Yeah, Nickelback. I just talk to myself while the tears rolling down, 'cause it's the world I know. This is the world I know. It's like if you took Elvis and a dog who's moaning and you kind of combine the two. It's like a little Elvis and then a little bit of like, that's basically how you get Creed. All right. I don't know why I'm a little goofy tonight. All right. Everyone loves to hate, but they're great. Yeah, that's Nickelback, not Flowery Languages. But anyway, yes. So all that to say is leaving behind the world you know is always going to be difficult, even if the world you know you hate, even if the world you know is something that has been dysfunctional, chaotic, and toxic, and you want to go to a more functional way of living life. That's great. Let's do it. But expect it to be emotional, expect it to be painful, and know that this new world that you're walking into is a world of unknown. And when we're in a state of unknown, we are going to be afraid. So when you take a mouse and you throw them in a cage, it doesn't matter how many treats are in that cage. It doesn't matter how beautiful that cage, it could be the rat park. It could be the best place that any mouse or rat has ever been in. It's in an unknown territory. Its first response is going to be fear. Its first response is going to be anxiety. So you moving into a better way of living with healthier people can be terrifying. And it might even be more terrifying because while you are deeply desiring to connect and be loved, you also fear that you are just unlovable. That is with every person. Carl Rogers, one of my favorite psychologists of all time, he developed client-centered therapy. And he talked about how with every client he ever worked at, they came to a point in therapy where they had to face themselves. And it was like facing a monster under the bed. They feared that when they look at the deepest level of themselves, they were going to see a monster. And to be able to actually love themselves was the turning point, the pivot point in therapy. So there's not a monster there, but it is scary, and you might think that you are one. Was there ever a time in your life, not regarding relationships, that you felt like you were being consumed by darkness, sadness, to where you thought you wouldn't make it out? Yeah, absolutely. Man, I don't know why I'm such in a music mode today, but now I'm thinking of the song, The Sound of Silence. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk to you again. And I've definitely felt that. I grew up with a lot of melancholy. And I asked my mom about this a long time ago and asked her, like, what do you think was the origin of that? And as far as she can tell, I always had it. I think it goes along with introspection. I think it goes along with isolation. And I had different things in my life that made me feel isolated, including chronic pain. Chronic pain is a pretty big isolator. So when you're in pain and you're trying to function, it's isolating even from the present moment, because you can't fully be present when you're also partly in pain and struggling with pain. It's because you're disturbed. Gee, I was thinking of the Simon and Garfunkel, not the Disturbed version of the Sound of Silence. But anyway, so I have struggled with depression most of my life. Now, I'm not going to say I struggled with it the worst of people that I've known. I think some people have a lot deeper struggles with depression, and some people don't ever struggle with depression. It has a lot to do with their wiring, and we could talk about influence and correlation with that. But it's a complicated topic. There's a lot of influences. What matters is working with it, not against it. Now, that doesn't mean you will always have seasons of depression if you once did. I can't remember the last time that I've really had a deep season of depression. I might have a harder day. But part of being an artist, talk about the song The Sound of Silence, might be the best song ever written in my mind, was by someone that obviously reflects on both the beauty of life and its absence. And so if you want to live a deeply passionate life of meaning and purpose, there always is going to be loss associated with that in a world that is not eternal. So there's always death, there's always difficulty, there's always pain. If you wanted to go like I think it's interesting. It's not an accident that the alpha male movement leans towards stoicism when it comes to the philosophy and perspective of it all, because stoicism is cowardly. Stoicism is a wounded state of not believing that you can fully embrace reality. That is what stoicism is. Okay. I'm not saying there aren't good stoics, but stoicism is not living your best life. Stoicism is, I'm afraid to truly care about stuff, to truly engage, to truly be vulnerable, to truly be real. So I'm retreating into this stoic state to try to survive. And so I think it's really funny that these alpha males are stoic, and it's like, okay, so you're giving yourself away, you're scared, and you're retreating into this stoic shield to not have to feel vulnerable. So anyway, how active are you in the sessions? Do you tend to guide, challenge, or mostly listen? I think there's a golden ratio. And I won't say that I'm like the best therapist of knowing what that ratio is. But I can tell you clients that are really hard to get to talk are actually exhausting for me as a therapist. It's very tough. I mean, honestly, even this is, I'm responding to a chat. I'm doing a lot of the talking, way more than I do in a session, obviously, because I'm the only one that can be heard on the audio. So it's tiring. It helps when you guys come up with questions, so I'm just responding to that. But all that to say, I don't think we get a lot done in therapy when I'm doing most of the talking. At the same time, I have clients that are the opposite, and they will chit chat and just keep on for the whole hour and never give me any opportunity for intervention, questions, exercises, feedback. That's not good either. If I'm going to put a number on it, I would say 70-30. But I mean, I'll be honest, that's more of a feel. Like, I don't think about it that specifically, but 70% the client and 30% me is generally how active I think is that golden ratio, where I'm giving enough guidance, enough challenging. But I'll say it does vary, because I have clients that will sometimes be like hitting one after another great points, and I'm just making sure they don't get stuck. And so if they're just like on a flow and it's all great, awesome. So then it could be that they're talking 90%. I wouldn't think that'd be the beginning of therapy. That's more, at least we've made significant difference. And honestly, so I have a music teacher, and I think it's similar with the music teacher, that like when we first started, it was mostly him talking, maybe actually 50-50. And then now I would say it's far more like 80-20. So I would like therapy to start with it being, maybe 70-30. And then as they go, maybe the clients can do more and more and me less and less. Because the idea is empowerment. The idea is I want them to have the skills. I don't want them a year later to be like, if it wasn't for Richard, I'd go insane. I want them to be like, I'm so grateful for therapy, and I love going back to therapy for more tools, but I don't need you anymore. Would be great. That's an interesting thing about therapy. You always want to be beneficial to your clients, but you really want them to be able to replace you, if that makes sense. He does both. He's very open and very safe. Thank you. That's always nice to hear. What's the hardest client mindset to do therapy with? Narcissists. They rarely go to therapy. So if you're dealing with a narcissist, so first of all, not everyone is a narcissist. It's a much smaller percentage unless you're dealing with Hollywood or Washington, D.C. And that's not a joke. That's actually statistics. So those are the two places that are CEOs also, by the way, hotbed for narcissists. But in general, it's somewhere around 1% of the population are truly narcissistic. Now, there's a lot of people that have narcissistic tendencies. So when you're dealing with a narcissist, it's usually because someone dragged them into therapy. And so it's most often in in couples counseling. That's really tough when you have one person that is like genuinely trying to work on their relationship and the other one thinks that they are always right. That's a really tough situation. There's very little hope. And as a therapist, you're trying to balance and be neutral, and it's really hard to do that. So I would say that is the hardest client mindset in therapy, is when they think they do nothing wrong. How do you continue learning or training as a therapist? There's a lot of different programs. So like when I get an opportunity, I actually have a guy who is a friend of mine who's hoping to be a trainer. And so I might wait for him to be certified, or I might use this other guy, but I'm planning on getting EMDR certified. But I read a lot of different therapy books for different therapeutic methods. So I'm not talking about, and I'm not trying to insult the book or whatever, but like that Let Them book series kind of stuff, not the pop psychology stuff. I'm talking about like more clinical approaches to therapy. So Happiness Trap is a good book that will inspire you, which I highly recommend to anyone reading as an example. Oh, what is EMDR? Great question. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So is the technical term for it. They're also sometimes used tapping. It is therapy that focuses on this kind of meditative visualization approach to therapy, where they are distracting you and reprocessing old memories to try to heal you from the wounds that were associated with that memory. It is helpful for some, it's not for others. It's not a magic bullet. It has been proven to be effective. I don't think it's ever going to be my main form of therapy, because acceptance and commitment therapy I really love, and the tools in it really work and are fun. But EMDR is another good tool to have in the arsenal. It's horrible to deal with a narcissist. They don't think they have a problem. Yeah. So, I mean, awareness is such a big key. And this can show up with a lot of different forms. But so I would say, even if I broaden it away from just true narcissists and clinical narcissists, anybody who's convinced, like actually, yeah, sounds like my ex, girlfriend, she was always right. Right. So that is a big problem, and something that even therapists talk about and I'll be vague here, but a lot of my therapist friends will talk about having couples come where often there's different cases, but often the person that dragged the person, so this is not this narcissist example, this is a different one, but one person will be dragging the other person into therapy, and that person will be convinced they're making no issues in the relationship, that all the issues are the other person. It's really hard to deal with that, because trying to get the person who brought their partner into therapy to realize that they are part of the problem is very difficult, because they think then you're biased. And even if you're going to go and say like 70-30, right? 70, the one person needs to work on stuff, and 30% the other. The person that brought them into therapy, that was convinced that the other person's problem, will be so mad at you for the 30% that they're supposed to improve, and think that you're biased, and then be like, we got to find another therapist. This therapist is biased. And all my therapist friends talk about it, where they're like, they'll be like, yeah, that couple came to me too. And then they went to like 5 others before they went to you. They'll go to another one. In my mind, it's hypnosis, no matter how much I know it's not EMDR. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people feel that way, so it kind of is. But it's not, I guess maybe the better term is, in some ways it is hypnotherapy, not hypnosis. So I don't really know a lot about hypnosis in terms of the, like, I know it's not like it is in the movies, but that whole like brainwashing idea of like Get Out level film stuff, right? There's a party trick magic hypnosis thing, and some of it is somewhat legit on suggestibility and some of it is not, and I don't pretend to be an expert on that. Hypnotherapy is about working with the mind for suggestibility to overcome habits that the person already wants to remove. So it's not actually a brainwashing, it's not actually a hypnotic state. It's a relaxed state where you're more suggestive, and that is what EMDR is. So it's different ways to try to get your defenses down so that the suggestibility is easier to follow through. So you're not wrong. It is hypnotherapy. Like, it's a different method, but I guess you could argue it's not hypnotherapy, but it is like hypnotherapy in its approach. Okay. Stoicism, like the movie The Remains of the Day. I've seen The Remains of the Day, but I'll be honest, it's been so long that I don't remember it. That's Anthony Hopkins, right? I'm pretty sure that's Anthony Hopkins. Or I'm thinking of the wrong movie and I haven't seen it. He was a stoic in some respects and missed out on a relationship with the housekeeper. Yeah. So stoicism, you are going to miss out on life. And I don't think you should judge Stoics. I don't think you should idolize them either. So if you're in a period of stoicism, that's fine. Just don't idolize it, because it might be what you need for like recovery from emotional hangover where you had such emotional trauma that you're going in a self-defensive state automatically, and you need to do that for a little while. Just that shouldn't be a state to stay in. And the problem with stoicism is they idolize it like it's bravery when it's not. How do you approach stabilization and safety before deep trauma processing? I mean, of course, as a therapist, this is just the basics of building rapport. So the more they get comfortable with you and the energy that you provide being consistent. So I don't know if you're asking it as a therapist or as a person who's dealing with deep trauma yourself. But it's a similar approach. You just do it to yourself rather than for another person. So anything you can do to start to stabilize. Think about the patterns of stables, of what is stable, right? It's consistent, it's predictable. So we want to be consistent and we want to be predictable. So one of the things, even in therapy, I'll have like a repetition thing. That sounds like now brainwashing with hypnosis on my mind. But I'll have like a little bit of repetition thing. And most clients accept it without even explanation. Some clients will be like, you already asked me that question, right? What, are you not listening? What, are you not paying attention? It's like, no, we're going to go over the same stuff again and again. Your answers will differ even in the tone of your voice. I mean, even with the basic, often start of therapy is how you're doing today. And by the tone of the way they say, fine, it's usually going to direct a lot of where we're going in that session. So when I hear somebody say, how you doing today? Fine. How you doing today? Fine. How you doing today? Fine. It's like, these are three very different sessions that we just walked into. And we're going to unpack that and reprocess it until it changes. So in terms of stabilization and safety before deep trauma, so someone who's experienced deep trauma, their brain is preparing themselves for the next attack. And that is very costly to our whole autoimmune system. Even our indigestion, food processing, right? Our heart, for sure. Like, it ages us. Stress is very toxic to the body. So being prepared for an attack all the time is very struggle. How do you handle disassociation? So that's a great going on to what I'm talking about. How do you handle disassociation, shutdown, or emotional flooding if it happens in session? So disassociation, for those of you who don't know, is actually what I'm talking about when your body becomes, or your mind becomes so toxic that there becomes a break, and that can form ultimately into dissociative identity disorder, when different parts of your personality actually fracture to be not on speaking terms, and they develop into what used to be called multiple personality disorder. So I have had clients dysregulate, not truly fully disassociate, but definitely dysregulate, shut down, and have emotional flooding in sessions. It's weathering the storm. So, like, there's different things you can do to try to be stable. You're going to, in my experience, it's really helpful to be very repetitive in that time period, right? And sometimes all you can actually do is say, "You're safe, and I hear you, right? I'm here." But it's the main thing is waiting till it ends. And like, I won't, I'm usually pretty, not like super strict, but like I pretty much stay on schedule. I have clients back to back often. So I have an hour for that client, unless they book. I have some clients that book 2 hours, but unless they book 2 hours, we've got an hour. That's what we've got. But if I had a client that was dysregulated and going through an emotional thing, it's like I got to take the time to wait for that wave to end for therapeutic reasons, because when that wave ends, that's where the therapy really begins, after the shutdown, when I've brought them back, and as long as they don't leave, they will be brought back. And them seeing that they could survive that wave of emotions, that so-called flooding, right, didn't actually drown them, then they realize that they don't have to give in, and that's a win. So no matter what happens while they're and I've had people turn on me. Like, I've had people be really nasty to me in sessions because they were dysregulated and dealing with emotions, and say terrible things and think that I'm against them. And by the time I calmed them down and got them back, really they calmed themselves, but I was just stable and consistent. Then they apologize, and it's like, that's okay. It's not about me. Let's look at this process, because you've now succeeded. You went through that, even with you nasty at the time, right? Without abandoning, without trying to cope, with still feeling the feelings, which makes it easier to face it, easier to reprocess, and easily to reprogram to a more stable person, and someone who's able to deal with those emotions. They don't build up to that extent. I hope I'm answering your question. Let me know if not. It's weird that I feel like when I suppress my feelings, no matter how good or bad they are, I feel like I do better. No, I mean, it's not that surprising. It's not that weird, um, because it it's like it's a coping it's a coping process of managing, right? So you can control it. So people that have struggled to be in environments where it's safe to break down are people that usually have that feeling of where it feels better and more manageable, that they can kind of suppress it a little bit. And there is some like maturity in ability to control it, but kind of in the opposite direction. So like, one of my favorite therapy exercises is where you actually schedule yourself to feel different emotions, and you practice them in that moment. And so you can use different things to influence you into that, but like, you'll feel sad for 15 minutes, and then happy for 15 minutes, and practice that as intensely as you possibly can. And when you go through that process and really lean into it, whichever one it be, or both, actually, I like going from sadness to happy. You actually get more skill at dealing with those emotions, so you don't have to suppress them as much, with them still not feeling out of control. Because the problem is, if you didn't grow up in a stable family environment, then you had to regulate your emotions or you weren't safe. And ironically, paradoxically, it actually makes you worse at managing your emotions if that happens. So if you were able to dysregulate, if you're able to just be a baby and cry, and when you were a baby and it was appropriate to cry, you're far less likely of doing that because you naturally healthily deal with your emotions because you've practiced that from childhood, from being in a place where you could cry and weep and be nasty and throw a temper tantrum and still be safe, if that makes sense. Let me know if you doesn't. How do you handle? I say, looking at your trauma is painful. It is natural to shut down until you can come back to reality. Yeah, and so like even experiential avoidance. So in acceptance and commitment therapy, we talk about experiential avoidance a lot, and we talk about it predominantly as a negative because as human beings, we lean far too heavily into experiential avoidance, but it's not always bad. There are times where the best thing that you can do is to avoid that negative emotion, right, for a minute or two and give yourself some self-care. And that might like coping skills aren't bad. It just depends on how much we're using it. Even so, like exercise is an example. I love exercise and I use it as a therapeutic tool for sure to process emotions, but I'm also aware that I can use it to suppress and run away, both metaphorically and literally, from my trauma. So it can be helpful to just punch a bag and numb. But what I would like people to do is if they're in that spot where you need that adrenaline and endorphin rush, to then use it to process and journal afterwards, if that makes sense. So then with your guard down, and this is like EMDR. So EMDR with the tapping and the eye movement, they have all these theories on why it works. We don't know why it works. We just know that it works. I don't really agree with those theories personally. I think that it's just your guard gets down because you're somewhat distracted. I think if I had a client that was like a really big long distance runner, as an example, and I was having a hard time getting them to be emotional or vulnerable, and I just went on a run and asked the same questions, they'd give me more real and raw answers, and we'd probably have a more effective and efficient form of therapy. Now, that wouldn't work for somebody who wasn't a runner because they'd be too distracted. They have to be just a little distracted for their guard to be down. But I have done similar with one client I had. I worked out with them because it was like they were so shelled up, they were so stoic, that getting them to actually open up, I just was like, okay, we're going to work out. And I like working out, so it was win-win. How do you help clients mourn versions of themselves or futures that won't happen? Ooh, the futures that won't happen is probably the hardest. So, I mean, I actually just talked about one of my pivot points for group therapy. I think I was talking about it in an R&R mental health video with Ripley. The Dear John letter to your former self. That one I did in group therapy. And it was a real pivot point for some of the people that attended that group therapy, where like they progressed so rapidly after that. It was and I actually have the idea that I talk about with some people of like literally having a funeral, and you could have your friends and family there that are your closest that would understand it and are in your support network. You'd have to obviously explain it, or you could do it just by yourself or with your therapist. But like literally having a ceremony to mourn the former version of yourself. And what I like to always balance is all of the positive aspects of that person that you still will carry with them, like you would from anyone, the memory of someone that you have a relationship with that passed away, but also the things about them that are the reasons why you have to let them go. Now, the futures that won't happen is tough because what we're doing here is we're curiosity, deep understanding of ourselves. There's usually things that we deeply desire. And there's no doubt, talk about what Carol said earlier about how painful it is to look at your trauma and how natural it is to want to shut down, looking at your deep desires that are part of the way you're designed to be, part of the why you crave that is because of your design. And realizing that you might or even definitely won't have those things is very painful to feel. And this is where the discernment comes in for each person. Like, only you know how painful it is. Only you know how much you have to balance that. So knowing when you have to kind of set back and look at what you still can hope for, what your life can still be in, the good that you still have, which is going to be enough, while also spending other times looking at the thing that you have to mourn and have to let go of. And it's got to be okay that it's still something that you desire, that's still something that you would want that you might not have. Like, that's reality. Nobody gets everything they want out of life. This is the bittersweet that sitting in takes emotional maturity. We can get there, but it's okay if we're not there yet. Right? Does that make sense? So it's hard to answer the question of what I would do to help clients in mourning the futures that they don't want, because it somewhat depends on their emotional maturity. It somewhat depends on the level of, the topic. Like, if they're mourning that they didn't get to be a professional baseball player, I'm not diminishing that. Like, as a person who was in a wrestling family, I get how much it means, but that's not the same thing as mourning a child that died at 13 and the future of walking them down the aisle that you're not going to be able to have, as an example. That's a heavy level, right? And so you're, say, as a father, and you lost your daughter, like, that's a deep wiring of a deep design that you have, that you were looking forward to that moment, right? And now you'll never have it. Like, that's a heavy level of mourning, right? And sitting with that bittersweet makes actually your life richer at a certain point, but it depends on what season you're in, and you might not be able to look at that yet. I hope that made all sense. I feel like it's common to have the overlap of futures that won't happen with the parts of our identity. There's this terrible, wonderful thing that we have between our ears, and it is something that brings us so much joy and so much pain. And we have our anxiety wired to constantly replay this painful projection of what might happen. And it sometimes helps us come up with strategies to prevent it from happening, but often we are spending all this time in worry and anxiety about something that never ends up happening. And then at the same time, we can replay all the things that are not only the things that we miss about the past, but also like these ideas of what could have happened if we had done things differently. Hindsight is not 2020. Okay, if you survived 2020, you'll remember 2020 was a big B word, right? 2020 is not accurate. It's just mean. It's just cruel. It just tells you of all the things you should have and could have and would have, and you can't should have yourself to death. So in that process, yeah, those possible futures that you're mourning is part of the process of developing that mental health kung fu. And one thing that I would say is a really helpful tool to at least survive what we call rumination, which is that whether it's anxiety or depression, sadness about the past, is if your imagination is engaged, it can only be engaged in one direction. So if you learn to start actively using your imagination so that's what it is, by the way. Anxiety or sadness about the past is, worry about the future, sadness about the past is just a product of your imagination. Here in the middle of imagination, right in the middle of my head, I close my eyes and imagine that my bed isn't really my bed. And the song, by the way, that's Sesame Street. The song ends, Bert and Ernie. I think, yeah, Bert and Ernie is Sesame Street, I think. Anyway, it ends with the most remarkable things I think have a way of being true. And that's true. So if you do practice visualization, meditation, imagination exercises, you'll actually be drawn more into things that are real and things that are true. So that is a very helpful tool to get you to not ruminate. I actually gave a whole sermon about that years ago, and people just called it the Sesame Street sermon and mocked it because I talked about that song, and I'm like, man, I'm literally talking about one of the most advanced principles of mental health that we use in the most successful therapy that is Carl Jung created, that is like so deep and rich, and they just focus on the fact that I used a Sesame Street song to illustrate it, but whatever. Everybody's a critic. I mean, I'll make acknowledgement that when whatever emotions I'm feeling, but typically I won't allow myself to revel in that emotion. Okay, so that's okay. Whatever emotion it may be, what keeps me sane. So what I say is this language between accept and embrace. I accept sadness when it comes. I embrace joy. So my relationship with sadness is I let it flow, right? I let it come and I let it go. And so I'm not trying to hold back my sadness at all anymore. I don't need to, because I'm safe. I know I can sit in the darkest of places without falling into despair. Now that didn't come overnight, but it's also what allows me to do that with clients. So when clients are struggling and they're afraid to feel some kind of sadness, I can sit with them and be like, look, I'm not scared. I've been in the dark long enough, right? You have merely adapted to the dark, but I was born in it, right? I can feel very comfortable in the deepest darkness places. I had a client that came to me actually because they went to a therapist that was too depressed from hearing their story to give them therapy, which is so frustrating for me. Like, don't do this profession, because that was scarring for that client, who is now doing great, by the way. But yeah, her story was very dark, and there were some things that happened in it that I'm not even going to go into here unless you guys really want me to. But it's really tough stuff. And she's doing wonderful. She's got a new life, a new family. Like, perfect? No, of course not. Come 180 degrees difference. Her life is really rich and meaning. She had everything that she wanted when she first came to therapy. And, it wasn't that I was so brilliant. It wasn't that I was so, wise that I corrected her. And she just needed someone who was able to be a faithful witness and face that darkness with her without being scared. And that's one way, going back all the way to, I want to say it was Amy's question about regulating people, is when I stay regulated, when they're freaking out, it helps calm them and get regulated too. But typically, all right. Almost always I do the deep breaths, great to do, and say to myself, this too shall pass. You shall not pass, unless I'm Gandalf the Grey, in which case, yeah, you shall not pass. Yeah, so actually, I just talked about this morning, where singing is actually huge, because your larynx and the vibrations is all attached to that vagus nerve system, which is where we actually regulate and de-stress. So you can actually sing. You can sing out. If you want to sing out, sing out. And if you're somebody who is spiritual, you can also sing worship. And that's a good thing that I will do for sure. Then living with these insights does bring joy and peace inside after the storm. Absolutely. Acceptance is a hell of a drug. Yeah, acceptance is one of the most powerful tools in therapy. And it's a powerful tool for what? Say it together: transformation and change. All right, so acceptance is not the enemy of change. It is the mechanics of change. Oops, drop my water bottle. The first thing necessary for change is usually awareness, but then acceptance. So acceptance is very powerful. Grief is blocking hope because part of you is still waiting for the old future to return. Yeah, so that's one. So that's where despair comes in too, is like when we feel stuck. And we often feel stuck because there's a part of us that wants one thing and a part of us wants the other thing. And if we stay there forever, uh, we're going to be, we're going to be in a lot of pain. And so, at a certain point as a therapist, what I'm not going to do is tell you what you need to change, which one you need to let go of. If you're holding two things that are pulling you apart, what I'm going to do is try to encourage curiosity and interest so you come to a deeper understanding of each of those parts till they come into alignment and agreement. And they always do. I mean, in my experience, when I have a client who's willing to talk about those feelings in those spaces, willing to actually go to that grief, and then that desire to move on, right? So that could be the two parts. One is grieving and holding on to the old version of yourself and the old story, and the other one is like desperately saying, no, I don't want to get stuck, I want to move on, I don't want to deal with this anymore, right? And they're pulling you apart, and it's just like James Dean in the movie Rebel Without a Cause. For anyone who's seen it, let me know in the chats if you've seen it. About nobody is, well, you say one thing, you say another, everyone switches back in. You're tearing me apart. Is one of the famous lines in Rebel Without a Cause for the movie buffs out there. Do you think it's easier if you name your grief? Absolutely. It's easier to name grief, name shame, name pain, name emotions, say it out loud. For sure. Because once you have the name of any kind of demon, you have spiritual authority over it. So that's true of the inner demons for sure in our lives. I've heard some others talk about it, but you are on the same page of the shame versus guilt. Absolutely. I did do a little R&R video where I talked about how we can do better than guilt. Because if guilt says I did bad, empowerment says I can do even better. And so whether we're guilty so the problem with guilt is it's too focused on what we did bad. Shame is I am bad. So this is Brene Brown, by the way, who really at least popularized this, and she's great. So like I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, and I'm not a big fan of a lot of people in the mental health field, but like she's pretty legit. But anyway, she talks about how guilt is good because it says I did bad, which actually allows us to do better. And shame is bad because it's identifying with the bad, and that's I am bad. So that's really good. I love it. It's all good. But I do think the one thing that we can improve on is focusing on how we can do better rather than what we did that's bad. And also, it's a lot easier if we to resolve conflict, if we take the approach of like just saying, I can do better is enough to apologize. So then I'm not having to say I was wrong every apology. I can say, please forgive me. I want to communicate better in the future. And I know that I didn't communicate to the best of my ability. So I apologize for that. That is a genuine, heartfelt, and real apology that is not out of guilt or shame. I don't know if that answers your question. Let me know. I'm going to start singing loud in public. I love it when people are angry at it. Definitely is a good visual. Some old singing lady. Yeah, I mean, like, why not? Right? I will dance in public sometimes, and it's always interesting. And like, I mean, just like in the grocery store, like walking down the aisle, I just start dancing. I'll be listening to my headphones and dancing. And it's always funny because I get two very different reactions. Well, maybe three weird looks of like, what's wrong with you? And like people shielding their children from me for some reason is one of the common reactions. And then another one is like trying not to make eye contact look at me and pretending like they don't notice, but in this way that is super awkward and makes it even weirder. And then the third one is people that love it and go like, yeah, like you go and like you start dancing with you. You might as well live your life, All right. On another topic, the loss of my older brother was many decades ago. One therapist told me not to think about my brother. Oh, bad. bad therapist. That was a therapist? That was a clinical mental health counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist? Uh, because that's terrible. That is not evidence-based therapy practice. One therapist told me not to think about my brother to help get over it. That wasn't the answer. What helps in healing? Oh my gosh, it's so sad. It's the opposite. It's literally the opposite. So like psychologist, ugh, that's still bad. I was kind of hoping it was a psychiatrist and they're not actually clinically trained. Well, there is non-clinical psychologists though. I don't know. Either way, that is not in line with best practices for therapy. So the more that you feel like you can put the memory of your brother in a healthy place where you hold it as the treasure that it is, which is always going to be a bittersweet, and that's okay. Pain does not heal all wounds. It puts them into perspective, and sometime with perspective of time, the wound still is bittersweet. It's still the sweet of the memories that you have of your brother and the bitter of the parting and the way he parted, right? So that's where you're holding it all at the same time. And the more you practice that, the better you will be at knowing where to put it. And so some of the tension is that it's always going to be hard, but some of the tension is you just don't know where to put it. And the more you process and practice that as you are able to, so it might be, look, you need to be thinking about something more positive and healthy for a little bit because right now you're ruminating on it, or right now you're struggling too much to be able to healthily process this. That's fine. But to say never think about it again, that's terrible. There's a balance between denial and obsession. I've found its simplest. I found at its simplest, Richard's answer will 90% of the time be the balance. Oh, thanks. At earliest convenience, if you wish, may we have a Ripley cameo? Oh man, where is the girl? Ripley! I haven't seen her in a little bit. So I'm at home, and she might be in the heating mat. It gets a little cold now in the evenings, and I put out a heating mat on her bed, so she might be there. But hopefully soon we'll have a Ripley cameo. I will. Probably not tonight though, because we don't have much time left. If she chooses to grace us with her presence, yeah, she's the queen. She does usually come when I call, especially when we're out in public. But if she's on the heating mat, she won't. But like I was impressed. I let her outside, and she was walking a little too far away, and I wanted her to come back in, so I called her. She looked up, and then just slowly but diligently, step by step, carefully came back, went inside. So proud of that girl. She knows who her friends are. All right, talk to him out loud and know they are always with you. I miss my sister every day, but I am. Yeah, I mean, and like I have a lot of people. I mean, okay, so speaking of Ripley, and there's a picture of my cat Ellie who passed away in this last year, and I put her in my happy place. So I have a visualization meditation practice where I have this place of peace. I could talk about it more in a different week, where we have this beautiful forest in the fall and Jesus is there and there's a deer. And the deer's always been there. I don't know why, but I always put a deer in there. And then there's an eagle overhead. And then when Ellie passed away, I had her meet me in my place of peace. And like she sits in my lap and purrs. And it's a way that I can hold her memory, and it's beautiful and I love it. So Ellie is still with me, and I don't want it to be anything different. And that's true of my friends like Floyd, who passed away, and Ken. I still think of them, and it's a bittersweet for sure, but I don't want to be without that memory. My grandmother, if she, yeah, okay. Also laugh with her. Yeah, it works. Yeah, laughing with your sister, I think you're saying, but yeah, she could do that for her brother because you're safe for her. Yeah. Why she came back when I called is what I said. Perfect. I love it. The puns. When I was a kid, I really cared a lot about intelligent humor, and I'm still not a big fan of gross out or toilet humor. but I've come to love dad humor so much that I actually like getting cringes more than I like getting laughs nowadays. So doing the puns that people all like to make fun of, it's like Nickelback. Really actually fun to listen to and not that bad, but everybody likes to make fun of it. Everyone pretends like they hate it, but they actually love it. I want to thank you for all the good learning session. And always, Richard, you're the best. Thank you. I appreciate all you guys for coming and participating in the chats. So please tell your friends, come next week, bring your questions, and keep this unscripted mental health chat going so we can become healthier every day, even if that's just 1%. It will make all the difference in the long run. All right. Hope you guys have a good night. And yeah, love you all.